welcome to Lead Live, reminding you of your personal genius and how you think in order to actualize what you desire.
Hello. Welcome back to Lead Live. My name is Dr. Elnora Webb, and we have another guest today who will, I think, shed light and share gems. And so we are pleased to have you be with us to talk about the importance of ethical, equity-centered, and effective leadership. And yes, they all do go together. You do not have to compromise one for the other. Effective leadership leads to the kinds of transformations that we find most valuable in all organizations. The kind of leadership that says everyone matters. The kind of leadership that says we are going to remain principled throughout the entire process, even if it makes me, the person in the leadership role, uncomfortable. And especially when it makes me uncomfortable, because I understand that the process of creating a new, transforming to move from one paradigm to another that actually adds more value, by necessity creates discomfort because there's uncertainty and much more. So I want to introduce you to our guest. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time than I normally do because of her remarkable background, not to negate any of the others. But I want you to hear it, especially because of what you're going to experience with her. So Dr. Cheryl Ann Marie Anderson is an American epidemiologist. She's a professor and founding dean of the Herbert Wertheim Public School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science Department at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. She has a remarkable experience, a legacy that she's built, and you're going to see that she's quite young in the scheme of things, seemingly, that she's already carried out groundbreaking research. She's achieved quite a lot, not only in her dissertations, but also in her publications, in her contributions in working in support of communities across the United States, from one end to the other. Her education includes Bachelor's of Arts with honors in Health and Society from Brown University, Master's of Public Health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Master's of Science in the Department of Epidemiology. Let me get this right, folks. At the University of Washington, she has earned a doctorate of philosophy from the University of Washington, Department of Epidemiology, interdisciplinary program in nutritional sciences. I can share more about her actual education, but I'm going to move forward and highlight a few aspects of her career. She's an affiliate member of the Cancer Prevention Research Program at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, or I should say was, and has taught many years, including in epidemiology in the Department of Biostatistics and Epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania, Center for Clinical Epidemiology and Biostatistics. She was a scientist in the Department of Epidemiology at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She was a core faculty at the Welch Center for Prevention, Epidemiology, and Clinical Research at Johns Hopkins Medical Institution. She is joint appointment, or was, as assistant professor in the Division of General Medicine at the same institution, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and the Departments of Epidemiology and International Health, Human Nutrition, and Bloomberg School of Public Health. She as well was the director of Bachelor's of Science in the Public Health Program at the University of California at San Diego prior to becoming and founding the current School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science. I could say a lot more, but I want to point out one of the many key points in her background and her commitment currently. She's involved with several research projects, including the California Teacher Study and the resolve to save 100 million lives D&I initiative. So without further ado, as I share with you a few of her honors and just highlight that she has many notable publications, I'd like to have Jet bring Dr. Anderson to the studio. And she's been a fellow with the American Heart Association. She's elected to membership with the National Academy of Medicine in 2016, and principal investigator on the U.S. 10-day seminar on the epidemiology and prevention of cardiovascular disease since 2017. Wow. Okay, I think I've got the pronunciation correct now in terms of epidemiology. You can correct me. Welcome, Dr. Cheryl Anderson. It's a pleasure to have you on Lead Live.
It is a pleasure for me to be with you on Lead Live, so thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Would you share something with the viewing audience that they would not find online or most people would not know about you?
Sure. What a great question. So something that very few people would know about me is that I spent some time as a DJ.
Really?
Yeah. So you just went through my academic credentials, but I happen to love music in all its forms. And a side gig of mine when I was in my, I guess, earlier decades was working as a DJ for WBRD down in South Florida.
I love it. I love it. So what kind of music did you, what do you call it? Did you play?
It was an R&B station. And quite honestly, I didn't get to play as much of my own thing as, you know, there's a playlist. What I remember most, because I was so young and I was doing this as a part of a scholarship internship, you know, kind of a program, was all of the cassette tapes. And so you'd go in and you'd get like music that had been compilations that no one else would ever see in the, what were those record stores back in the day? You know, the Tower Records, right?
Yes, that's right.
All of the DJs would have early and great access to them. So I had an extensive music collection through the times that I would spend in the studio.
I love it. I love it. So tell us at least two of your favorite genres.
So I, believe it or not, I love country music. And I think my love of country music is parallel to my love of rhythm and blues, because in both genres, there's storytelling happening.
Yes.
And I think there's nothing more than, for me, someone who actually plays music, is about instrumentation and having that talent, but not necessarily having the talent to put the story together and hear other people's interpretation of what's going on in their own lives, what's going on around them. And, you know, like great hits like Buffalo Soldier by Bob Marley. That's reggae, not rhythm and blues. Those words just, they're like, really, where did that come from? And then Carrie Underwood has this song called Champion. I think you would love it. If you ever get a chance, like listen to this song. It is so powerful.
Champion.
Champion. And if I had a theme song, you know, it would either be Buffalo Soldier or Champion. And then I love Stevie Wonder, of course. You know, Reggae Woman just gets me dancing every time I hear it. I love Elton John. Like I am all over the place. And then I'm just as comfortable listening to jazz and classical. I just love music.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I love everything that you just conveyed. So I'm biased towards you. And so I want people to understand what is inspiring you to show up in the way that you show up. Yes, so I shared your part of your background. It's not your rich, full background, but it does speak to a level of commitment, of vision, and unwavering commitment to move forward in a particular direction. What is inspiring you? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because you could have just acquiesced and done what most of society says you should do as a woman, as a Black woman, as a 5 foot, whatever tall you are, and from where you're from. Why did you choose to move in the way that you've moved through life?
Yeah, so maybe we can take a look at one thing from the past, one thing that's happening now, and what I think about for the future. So from the past, I've had an incredible amount of investment in me. So it took a village to raise me. I grew up in a pretty solid middle class family who had moved into an area of South Florida where it was so clear that the haves were going to be fine and the have-nots were always going to struggle. And having those observations early in my life imprinted something in me that said, when you begin to understand this, you're actually going to be charged with doing something about it. So that's a bit from my past. In addition to that village that was raising me as a little girl, when I became an adult and I started studying in universities, there were people, all different types of people who embraced and mentored me. So now I feel this passion to pay this forward. In my present day life, I wake up every morning extremely grateful that I am in vocation. I get to do what actually is meaningful and satisfying for me. And I don't take that for granted because I know that isn't a state that many people achieve. Looking for the next thing that they want to do. They're hoping for that soul, fulfilling mission in life. And I have it. And I found it when I was about 17 years old. So that's my present. The other thing that motivates me is I think about the incredible responsibility, to whom much is given, much is expected. We often hear that in our culture. And the people that are coming along, they are watching, they're learning, they're, observing every single thing that's going on, whether they're, in K through 12 education, or they're in college, or they're in graduate education or postgraduate education. They're watching those of us who've gone ahead of them, and they're looking for those examples. They're looking for positive examples, and they're making note of negative examples. And I would like to be that positive example, that motivating force, that individual that through collaborative efforts is leaving a legacy for this next generation.
Excellent. Wow. 17 years old. I'm taken back there. You sowed the seeds when you were 17. You experienced the conditions that led you to sow the seeds when you were 17. And it reminds me of the statement that the moment we're in right now prepares us for the moment that we experience subsequent to now. The moments that you experienced then prepared you for now.
So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Turns out one of the things that you don't pick up about me as quickly on the internet is I went to college when I was 16. And in my second year of college, every day in fall semester, I sat through a course taught by Professor Lucille Newman, who was a trained anthropologist and a trained epidemiologist. And she was working in the School of Medicine in the behavioral and public health group. And Lucille Newman would walk into the classroom every day to teach us about culture and health. And it was my very first public health course. I looked at the material, I looked at Professor Newman, and I decided in her class that fall that I was going to be a professor, that I was going to be an epidemiologist, and that I would spend my life doing public health work. Wow. 17 years old. And what she did for me was all of the observations that I'd had earlier in my life, she gave me a framework to anchor them in. So everything started to make sense. And that early orientation to the ways of the world that were, they were sitting within my system, all of a sudden took on a whole new life.
Yes.
I never looked back. One of the reasons I've been able to accomplish what I have in the span of my life is that with good mentoring and good support and a lot of investment, I was able to continuously move through stages of education and more recently move through stages of leadership.
Hmm. Yeah. When you said that she gave you a framework, that gave me chills, because what it speaks to, or it reminds me of the many people who are in their lives, including, of course, us, who are doing what they're doing, and too many are not happy with what they're doing. And they could probably go back if they reflect long enough and know that there was some point in their life where they experienced A or B or C, and it set them up for this disappointment now. What I want you to tell them in your own way is that they get whatever that disappointment was, and they can shift it now. They can almost go back and actually go back in time and decide to flip the switch and then decide now to move forward in a way that adds value to them. They don't have to stay in that old paradigm with those old belief systems, old habits.
What a great paradigm you're just describing. So when I think about my story and I look back on the people who are a part of my story, there are a variety of paths that I see. So I see individuals from my childhood who never went much beyond a 3-mile radius of home. I see, and is, in adulthood still lives, within that 3-mile radius. Now, being out doesn't teach you everything, right? And there's so much richness when you're in communities that support you. And that is one potential path that we can take in our lives. And then there are others of us who explored the greater geographical, places that we could access. And there are, those of us who didn't really have a chance to make it much beyond our teens. I lost a classmate to gun violence. I lost one to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Some of us didn't make it out of our 20s, right? And some of us didn't make it out of our 30s to conditions that were largely because of the environments that we were exposed to. So what is that? How does that connect to what you're saying with regards to taking a look at the bumps in the road and the things that come our way that could potentially either stagnate us or propel us forward? And how do we make a choice every single day to look at what is going on with us and make a decision about how we're going to react to it? Because all we can do is to control our behaviors and our reactions to them. Now, I want to be realistic and say that the struggle is real, right? And not all the time are you going to feel like you're going to get from the struggle into this, amazing place, but it doesn't have to happen immediately. It is in every single day, hundreds of decisions that we make over the day, over the week, over the month, over the year that gets us to that eventual outcome.
Yes. Someone recently said to me and to a Lead Life audience that he had to pay up front for the benefits he wanted to experience later on. And that, he said it more eloquently than I just stated. And yet that's powerful. So you're saying essentially the same thing. Invest now. Do what's necessary now.
Yeah, I'm saying there's only one place where success comes before work. One place, and that's the dictionary. There's nowhere else in no domain of our lives where we're going to get that success before we put in the work. And sometimes we step back and we look at others and we think, oh, what a charmed life. Oh, what a beautiful story. I guarantee you, all of us have had our crosses to bear. And if you start to peel back, you'll see it's not what life is throwing at people often. It is what they're doing with what life is throwing at them.
And it's so powerful.
And I don't want to minimize the fact that some of us have huge burdens to bear.
Mhm.
but within the context of our own personal stories, right? We get to be the author. We get to figure out how people are going to remember us when we're no longer here. And that is not just, one big thing. It is a million little things that happens over the course of our time.
Yeah. Wow. I want to ask you to tell us about your journey that led you to lead the Herbert uh, Wertheim, am I pronouncing it correctly? Wertheim
Yeah.
School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science at the University of California, San Diego.
Yeah. So there are a couple of facets to your question, because there's well, isn't it just a wonderful honor to be a dean in a research intensive, highly regarded school, university setting? Of course, right? Like, anyone would hopefully feel honored by being asked to do something of that nature. In my case, I was asked to lead a school of public health when we were facing the worst public health crisis that any of us are going to see in our lifetime. We were facing a social and moment of justice and reckoning in our country that we haven't seen in a very long time, even though the events that were happening, many of us know weren't uncommon. We were just all of a sudden having this explosion of national conversation. And we were facing a looming economic crisis for most industries in the country and across the globe. So reflecting on my journey that led me to say yes to a position at this time in our history was really important. What made me look at what was being offered to me, and instead of saying, I did not sign up for this, right? Instead of that being the response, saying, yeah, I'm the right person at this time. So the journey for me has been, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's been one of pretty good clarity early in my life. And I think when you have clarity around purpose, and when you're being driven by purpose versus by the activity of the moment, it gives you clarity when you're faced with hard decisions. So my purpose was clear. I also think the journey included a lot of really good support and a lot of good relationship building. And I had mentors who had the perspective of, our mentoring relationship isn't from X year to Y year. It was a lifelong friendship and mentoring relationship. So when I was faced with this decision, I knew my purpose. I knew that I would have support. And I knew how to build the kinds of relationships that become very important when you're faced with a massive challenge. I would even want to acknowledge, the fact that I'm here with you right now is another example of how the kinds of support that one needs when they're doing big things can come into your life. So, I am very aware of the fact that being a woman, being an African American woman, being relatively young, they can all work against me as I'm trying to, do my purpose. And having a very strong sense of who came before me, what those women did, what African Americans have done, how much has been sacrificed for me to have these opportunities, how much there is to learn, and how willing I am to sit and listen and grow would be a part of my journey and my outcome in this new role. So I say, the journey has been certainly not easy, but it has been certainly anchored in purpose, and it has been anchored in support. And I thank you for, the role you've been playing in supporting me along this journey, because as people come into our lives, we know that if we are relational and if we have integrity in how we form our relations, then it can really be a powerful thing.
Let me tell you, it's my honor. I am very fortunate, and like many people on this planet, experience challenges throughout my life. And for whatever reason, my wiring is to assume that those challenges were preconditions to my success. So the degree to which I was attentive to them and chose to work through them rather than ignore them or run away from them really fostered my progress in a way that was synergistic with whatever vision I might have had at that moment. And that's what seems to resonate with me in terms of you. You just take life and recognize it's your responsibility to leverage it all, not just some of it, but all. And in doing so, you're not only an example to the hundreds of individuals with whom you work, who work under your supervision, who work collaboratively with you, but also the hundreds of nearly 700 students you have, undergraduates and graduates. Even if you never meet them one-on-one, they're watching you, they're listening to you, they're getting a sense of what leadership really looks like. And that's the nature of what I'm sure is happening with your own child and your own family. I want to ask this next question because this is so pivotal to why I asked you to be a guest. Would you describe why being ethical, why being equity centered is wrapped up in being an effective leader? And why is it important to be an effective leader when there are too many examples of folks who just want the money and they increasingly get more money? Now, let me just make it very clear to everyone. I believe that we should all have the resources we need. And I really do believe there's enough. We just have to make certain that people understand what's accessible and then build more pathways to gaining what people need, basic and more needs. When people pursue a role for the sake of just money, then it's inherently lacking of any kind of substance. But one can do that.
Yeah.
Why do you choose to focus on being equity centered as part of being functioning with integrity and ensuring that your efforts and that of your team are in fact effective?
Yeah, so let's start with the ethical piece first.
Mhm.
So the other thing that I can share with you that isn't apparent from my biography is that I spent a lot of time in boarding school as a kid.
Mm.
And in boarding school, this particular boarding school, it was a place where we would have our morning recitations. And it was a British school. And so recitations are pretty common within, the British educational structure. And what they do is I think it's a form of reinforcing, making mindful practices that are important and core values that are shared across the school's community. And so one of the things that I learned very early, and it sits with me, I can still recite it for you, is a recitation about yourself. And it goes, you tell on yourself by the friends you keep, by the very manner in which you speak, by the way you employ your leisure time, and by the use you make of dollars and dimes. And it goes on and on and on. And very early, I had this sense of, in all of the actions that I execute every single day, I'm telling a lot about who I am at my very core. And so I took ethics as a broader principle than just the things you do that people can see, but also what you do when no one's looking. Right?
Why
I
do?
mean, no one may be watching where I spend my money, but there's something about me in where I choose to spend my money and where I don't choose to spend my money, right? No one's really there when I'm with my girlfriends and we're chitter-chattering about XYZ, but what we're doing in those moments, whether we're lifting people up or tearing people down, says something about who I am. And what I allow people around me to do or not do says something about who I am. So to me, ethics is really about what you do when nobody is looking. And the people that I've respected the most in my personal life and in my private life and in my professional life are the people who I see them and I watch them struggle through hard decisions. And even if it's uncomfortable and even if it puts them in a tough situation, they will still come out on the side of what's right. They're going to do what's right and not just go along. So for me, that ethics is tied to equity because now all of a sudden you might be in a situation where the person who has the loudest voice, you have to make a decision about, do you let that voice predominate or do you actually look to see if all voices are being represented, if you're hearing the concerns and acknowledging the challenges of the individuals that might not seem to have such a strong voice. Now, the voice is my mother would always say the emptiest cans make the most noise. And so for me, being anchored in hearing that, as I was growing up, I am not always so moved by the person with the first to raise the hand or the loudest in the room. I'm looking to see where are those cans that, are full and deep and not making any noise and what the needs might be there. So that then, leads into your effectiveness because no matter what you're trying to do strategy-wise or product-wise, when you don't have the understanding of the people that you're working with and in this case, we're talking about trying to lead, then you're likely to not get very far. There's an old African proverb, if you want to move fast, you go alone. And if you want to move far, you go together.
Yes.
And so this idea of togetherness is anchored in people knowing that you are going to do the right thing, even when it's not convenient. And they know that you're going to look out for all, not just for, your buddies or the people who are, irritating you and you just want to, you want some reprieve. But you're really going to focus on all.
Wow. There's a comment here by Ms. Ha, and she writes, Dr. Cheryl, thanks for saying, let's see, what your actions are when no one is looking, that is in essence who you are. Ethics. What you do in your personal professional life will come into your leadership. Yes. Thank you, Tomoko. Yes. Yeah. Yep. And you are who you are based on how you invest your time. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tomoko.
There's another question. Jet, would you bring it up? I've enjoyed teaching. Now I'm ready to serve a university as a dean too. What do you recommend I do to prepare?
Wow, that's a really great question. So I think preparation for the life of a dean really depends on what type of institution you'd like to be a dean, you'd like to serve as a dean in. And the key word here is serve. This is a role of service. If this position were to be judged on, how many times people come and, tell you how great you are, and then it would be very unfulfilling, right? This is a role of service, putting others first, really trying to understand what the community needs are and how we can move in a unified way toward meeting goals. So institutions are different. We have small colleges, we have community colleges, we have research intensive institutions, we have liberal arts colleges. And I think that the way that one prepares to be a dean in the various types of institutions of higher education that we have would be different. I can talk about my story in a research intensive institution like UC San Diego. So deans, depending on the discipline or the school, take on different forms. For me, being within health sciences in a school of public health, it was really important to demonstrate that I had good, solid leadership experience. And my leadership experience was honed in two ways. One was on the campus itself, and another was on the national stage. And I don't know if you've ever heard this saying that you're not always a prophet in your own land. For me, it was very important when I was starting out to ensure that my land was diverse. So, I'd have my academic home. And if I was asked to step into a leadership role and I thought it made sense for my skill set, I would do it. And I looked for ways to collaborate with people all around the country, all around the world, and hone a broader leadership perspective there also. So sometimes people looking at you from your own institution might say, well, what do you know about leadership? You've had 5 roles here on the campus. But what's not apparent are the 10 roles that you have had on the national stage, on the international stage. And so I built a leadership portfolio that was quite diverse. And it gave me lots of different types of skills because I was effectively learning how to lead in different arenas. So that was really helpful. The other thing that's important is that you have an established grounding in whatever's important at that institution. At our institution, it's research intensive. And so I needed to have a really strong academic research presence so that as I'm trying to lead others in a research intensive environment, I could be a role model, an exemplar who would look at me and say, she's not asking us to do things that she hasn't done herself. So that was really important. The other thing that was key here at UC San Diego was having some time in the role that generally precedes a dean's role. So for us, it's a chair of a department usually, and then the next higher leadership role in the university could be an associate dean or a dean or maybe an associate vice chancellor, something in that space. So having served as a chair and I think effectively getting through milestones and benchmarks as a chair, being highly relational and getting a good handle on whether or not I was a good fit for the job, whether people would appreciate my style of leadership. I would often say to my colleagues, my style of leadership is distinct and I know it's not for everywhere. And so I wouldn't just apply for a job because it had the title dean in it. It was important for me to do my homework to figure out if the place was actually a good fit for me as a person.
Yeah, I think that last point is invaluable. Knowing that just because you want something does not mean every place is suitable to you. Knowing self is powerful, and it's a precondition to effective leadership. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree on that. I think self-awareness is a good precondition to being a good leader and to also being a good teammate. And what I want to also share that I've learned is that every leader is also a member of a team. Every leader. And so in addition to wanting to be out in a leadership role, you should be thinking about why should anyone follow you? And then also recognizing those moments when you are following someone else, right? And some leaders, some really good leaders, they lead from behind, And so being able to sit in those different spaces and recognize that good leaders are good followers, are good teammates, are highly collaborative, in my opinion, I think is also important.
Excellent. Jet, do we have a follow-up question? Oh, I'm in corporate America and I've taught part-time frequently over 5 years at Stanford. It's time for me to make the move to teaching full-time. Colleagues and friends think I'm crazy. What say you?
I say teachers are some of our most important resources in this country. And if you are feeling inspired and motivated and driven toward teaching full time, and you have an institution that is willing to establish that partnership with you, then go for it. What a really wonderful opportunity for people who are coming to the classroom to have someone who's worked full time or mostly in the industry that they are learning about. Because the value and the richness of what you're going to be able to teach in that classroom, the case studies that you'll put forward, the examples, the lessons learned, the potential, minefields to avoid are just so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any other questions, Jed? Oh, what does equity-centered mean?
So what I will share with you my favorite way of thinking about equity and diversity and inclusion, because we use these words a lot, and we don't often kind of put life behind them. So let's start with diversity, right? Because diversity is acknowledging that there are others around you who are different and inviting those individuals into a space. And let's call our space a party, right? I told you how much I love music. So we're going to have a great dance party. And we want that dance party to be diverse. So we're going to invite people from different walks of life into this party. Now, equity means that when they come to the party, their chances of being invited to dance are just as good as anybody else's, right? So you've been invited and now you get a chance to dance. What does inclusion mean? Inclusion means that you may even get to pick the song that gets played. Right? So when we say equity centered, we're talking about not just, checking boxes, making sure that we have representation from people. We're talking about ensuring that whatever activity we're trying to explore in an equitable way has participation and engagement and real involvement of the diverse voices that we've brought to the table.
I want to stay there for a moment because things seem to be calmer now, even given the elections and the work that's going on behind the scenes and in front of the cameras as we speak. And yet there's still this undercurrent of not only hate, but a system that is based upon governmental codification of separation and of undermining people's access to be able to dance, access to the room to dance, access to the room to be able to turn the music on, even access to the room itself. And so those things are real, and they're not contrived. They're not, get over the emotions of the past is in the past. They're still present now. And I'm mindful because one of my goddaughters, her and her husband just bought a home in the hills of Oakland, beautiful location. And her husband's white, she's Black, identifiable. They're very proud of their ethnic background, and they've got 2 beautiful twin kids. Well, they go to buy a house and they demand, I think they see the husband, that they don't see her initially. They demand for reasons related to the loan and anything else that she put down her ethnicity. And she says, no, we don't want to do that. And the broker, whoever it was, tells her it's a requirement. She later finds out it wasn't a requirement, so she puts it down anyway, but fearful about the consequences. But in the process, they get the house, and they're happy. But she calls me up right away and says she's looking at the deed, and the deed still has in it that Blacks cannot purchase this property. And this is what, 2020? And so she's mortified. And she is, you'd love her. She's earned her PhD from the University of University of California, San Francisco. She's a professor at one of the universities, and she's a go-getter. She's a scientist. She's all that. And she's looking at this and she can't believe it. And when they see her husband, everything's fine. When they see her, they have an issue. In any event, fast forward, as part of this year, we've witnessed harmful brutality, criminal behavior against Black bodies, against Black human beings, against African Americans, and other groups that are underrepresented in this country and otherwise disparaged. And so, yet you and many key individuals, I call key because of your ethical stance, your equity-centered stance, your real focus on effectiveness, independent of all the conditions, you're able to move forward and you're able to marshal key resources like an anti-racism training program or exposure or experience for your faculty and staff. And they are embracing it. And they're like, how do we embed this in everything that we do moving forward so we don't replicate this unintentionally as a white man, as a white female, you can fill in the blank, or even as a Black person or as a Latino person or as an Asian person, Pacific Islander, Native American. You get my point. How do you square all this real stuff, this historical and this present stuff, with the reality of folks trying to make it happen like you to move us forward? And how do you square having an elections where, and this is not about bringing you into politics, but where there's such a demonstration of what appears to be division. And I emphasize appear because we don't have all the real facts in terms of the voting machines and all that leads to the kind of outcomes that we have right now. So from your position, I threw a lot on the table. I know you can handle it. Tell us your perspective of why you stay in this grounded space and moving forward to address these things in a systematic way, especially the health disparities that are a consequence.
Yeah, first let me just say thank you so much for sharing the story about your goddaughter. I have 3 goddaughters myself, and I am so closely connected to them that I can only imagine how you hearing this would have impacted you on her behalf. So what she has experienced is one example of structural racism. And for us to move forward on the issue of racism and structural racism, it really takes a understanding beyond the lived experiences that many of us have, understanding of others who we will need as our allies to get us from where we currently are to where it is that I, in my deepest of my heart, believe that Americans want to be, which is better than we are. We want to treat people well. We want to be in community generally. So when we begin to understand these structural issues like redlining, which was a coordinated effort in our country to protect various neighborhoods, and I use the word protect because I think that was the stated intention, from integration and having people who looked differently from the white class in this country living in certain neighborhoods. I mean, this was law where banks could, with red ink, outline the zones around which you weren't allowed to move into. Well, there you are, right? So when you understand that these things were happening, it gives you a completely different perspective on some of the conversations that we currently have around equity, around diversity, around affirmative actions, around justice. Because when people encounter those conversations in their adult lives, because of the way our educational systems are set up, it's often their first time. And what they're thinking is, I didn't do anything wrong. Maybe my parents didn't even do anything wrong. What are you talking about right now? I'm looking around me. I'm seeing diverse people on TV. I see diverse people on the Forbes, list of 100 most wealthy people. I see, and they're realizing that, well, maybe you see 2 of 100, or, the majority of the images that are there are not diverse. And so we have a status quo that we've all sort of locked ourselves into. So why do I, as a dean in a school of public health, feel like it's important to do this kind of in-depth work with our school? So let me just first say, our school has committed to being an anti-racist school, which means that we are going to know what racism is. We're going to understand the colonial underpinnings. We're going to understand why race was even structured in our society. We're going to understand how it played itself out historically, and how there are economic issues involved, how there are ideological issues involved, and how there are political issues involved. Once we understand that, it makes it much easier for us to see racism when it is happening. And we pledged that when we see it, we know we can't unsee it, right? When we see it, we're going to call it, and we're going to do something about it. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to create spaces where people who are being harmed by whatever the incident was, because we live in a racist country. So these things, it's not if, it's when these things happen. When the incident happens, we're going to make spaces for those who are on the receiving end of the incident to heal. We're going to facilitate growth and understanding for the individuals that are perpetuating the act. And these mistakes are being made all the time through microaggressions, veiled aggressions, overt statements. When we know what's going on, we'll make a space for people to grow. The other thing that's really important is that we don't blow ourselves up every single time something happens, because it will happen. We have a constructed environment around us that leads to racism. And so if these things are going to now be, our eyes are going to be open to them, and we aren't compassionate with each other, and we don't allow space for listening and hearing and growing, then we won't have a harmonious environment. And so it's almost like you go counter to what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that's a part of why I commit to doing this work, because I think when it's done well and it's done through a lens of compassion, we really can advance where we currently are on race relations in this country and in this world.
Wow. You're giving me chills. It's interesting because when we spoke, I think it was yesterday, I threw out the word compassion, you may remember. And then I got a communication that you sent out that was all about compassion. And then I heard a colleague of yours, one of the faculty members, talk about compassion. It's like, wow. I don't mean it just in terms of the synergy among us and just thinking about compassion, but just the powerful aspect of what it stands for and the importance of it now. And it makes me think about what the movement was about, that grew to take prominence within the civil rights movement, and that was around nonviolence. At the core of it was compassion. You had to have compassion for the person who was beating you, who was causing dogs to bite you, who was harming you, was putting you in prison, who was killing you. Without that compassion, there couldn't be the soul of the society right-sized. You couldn't. But to engage in the same way, you just, with the aggressor, as an aggressor, you may have temporary resolve. You may break whatever is there temporarily, but it's fuel. Whereas compassion neutralizes and in time transforms and creates anew. And yet that work, not only is it powerful, it can be extremely painful. And yet it is the most sustainable.
I I just want to add something too about compassion is that we'll find ourselves sometimes in the space of needing to extend compassion, and then we'll find ourselves in the need of having compassion extended to us. And the idea that when people make mistakes, we don't judge them by their worst mistake. We judge them by the totality of their contributions in any community, in our community as a school, is what I think will allow us to, as you say, do this sustainably. Because you can imagine if, gosh, any little thing you do or any big thing that you do gets you excommunicated, then you are constantly in strife.
Powerful, powerful. There's a comment here, and I think we have another question. So let me show this. Thank you, Tomoko. What is the short-term and long-term consequences for individuals and organizations impacted where actions of ethics may be controversial due to differences in values? We see it all the time in the workplace and by decision makers.
Yeah, great question. So the short-term consequences here when we see things happening that aren't ethical are that you erode trust in a system. It takes an extremely long time to build it, and it takes a very short time to destroy it. And so the trust that individuals have in the system in the short term gets disrupted. And then if you think about it, if over a longer term, you have individuals who are trying to work together who don't trust the system, trying to advance goals, but they don't trust the system. They don't think that people are going to do the right thing, even when it's not convenient, then the entire strategy implodes, right? Culture will eat strategy for breakfast every single time. And so an ethical, transparent, collaborative, respectful, equitable culture is going to support the trust, the respect, the engagement, right? That the connections that people are looking for when they come into various organizations. And that is what advances the mission. That is the key component, behind that elbow grease is the culture that makes it. And you see it play out time and time again. Corporations that do really well, you start to scratch beneath that veneer, and you will always find that there's a healthy culture if they want to keep doing it long term. Now, there's some corporate companies that, and we saw it in the .com phase, right?
Yeah.
All about the next dollar. And they were boom and bust, did not go the long haul.
That's right. Right. That's right. There's another part of this question, though, and I'm going to bring it back up. And because it says, so there may be controversial issues based on values. And I think this is a powerful piece. So I was talking with someone, this must have been over 20 years ago, about integrity. And I'm reminded of it because someone else was talking to me this year about integrity, and they both said the same thing, essentially. Well, people can have integrity, and yet what their values are may be such that they're destructive by nature. So having the right values to begin with is so critical. So speaking of that,
shared values.
Exactly.
So remember, I talked a little bit about knowing my style and knowing it won't work everywhere, and knowing the places that I want to be in and that they aren't going to necessarily be good for me. It's the same thing. Like, where's the alignment with the core values? And if you cannot identify the core values of a place, that tells you something else.
Powerful. Jet, is there another question? Oh my goodness, we're already at 1. This is going so remarkably. I mean, this is insightful. This person, and this will be the last question, I think. I too am leading a team. It gets hard sometimes, really hard with all of the distractions. So we don't know all the distractions, but I think you can relate. What do you do to keep grounded? And how do you remain committed to your vision?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question. So I use a number of different strategies, but at the core of all of them is a reminder of my purpose and my desire to be a certain type of leader. And so when I think back to the purpose, and I'm like, okay, so this is still fitting with, what I think is my purpose. And I then go and I look at, okay, what are the characteristics that I will choose to live into? And sometimes it's really living into, because they may be aspirational and I'm growing in that space over some of the more difficult choices that one needs to make. And so the commitment to that vision is saying, okay, here's what I think my purpose is. Here are the key decisions that I make over and over and over every day, based and anchored in these characteristics, and I hold myself accountable. So I'll give you a great story about having this conversation with 3 of my friends, and I chose a girlfriend who's in my personal space. I chose one who shares both a personal and a professional space with me, and I chose one squarely in the professional space. And I said to them when I took on my first major leadership role, you know me and you know what I aspire to be. If ever you see me doing things or saying things that are outside of what I am telling you right now I want to do and be, you call me on it.
Powerful.
So, we can hold ourselves accountable by kind of taking that self-awareness look, but sometimes you may lose your footing a little bit, and people are looking at you, and your dear friends are watching you, and there are going to be shifts if shifts are occurring. And to give them that permission in a moment of lucidity to say, you call me on it. You remember this day and you say, Cheryl, you gave me permission to tell you that something is shifting in the direction that you wouldn't want it to shift. So that's a really kind of an external way of me making sure I stay grounded.
Yeah, and I don't know that I could add much other than just to remind that person and the many others who are in that situation. If you're leading, you do deal with controversial matters, you deal with challenges, yet I firmly believe they're just preconditions to you experiencing your greatness. So take a little step back, reflect on it, review it, and if you can, even depersonalize it and ask how you can leverage those set of conditions in order to move forward. And even if you don't know the answer right away, just keep moving forward, because those answers will show up even among the so-called detractors or the folks who are engaged in the behaviors that create challenges that you have to deal with. So,
and guess what? We've made it through 100% of all of our bad days. Precursors to our success.
This has been an absolute delight, Dr. Anderson. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with your Lead Live series. What a fantastic service that you're doing for all of us.
My honor. And thank you for choosing to lead, and choosing to lead in a way that distinguishes your whole team. And I think that given the nature of your work, you are already a national model. And so it's an honor to know and to be able to support in my minor way, because I see that future that is quite remarkable. And thank you for leading in that space.
With you today. Thank you.
Yay. So as Jet took Dean Anderson, Dr. Anderson, to the back studio, I want to thank you again for joining us. And I also want to let you know that we're bringing back 2 additional remarkable individuals. You enjoyed them previously, Nana Mashama. These gentlemen have built a remarkable business that's serving countless number of folks across the country, and they're going into universities and to nonprofit organizations and also corporations, and actually helping them develop a more centered, precise vision so that their brand is responsive to the needs of the various constituents, and they're able to just enjoy the nature of their work. So Shama will talk about some of that play, and they both will talk about their hope for humanity. So please join us, and they'll remind us, they will remind us why the personal leadership is always an imperative. Personal leadership now. Look forward to seeing you next week, Wednesday, always live, Pacific Standard Time, noon, and Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Take good care. Be well.